There's a mild but consistent element of fear that comes from an unexpected knock on the door. Not because we know what they want, but because we don't. Over the years, this fact has evolved into phone calls, with the once normal act of answering the phone now becoming an uncommon and noteworthy act. To see an unknown caller pop up on your screen is enough to make you wary of what that could mean. In that moment, someone has reached out to you that you cannot see. And the only way you can find out is to answer. It seems silly and mundane to many, but as time has gone on and our continued distrust of the world around us has grown, our fight or flight responses are kicking in faster and faster with every year. We do not trust each other. That in itself is unfortunate. But on top of that is the growing distrust in authority. A fairly recent survey found that only 9% of Britons believe that politicians tell the truth, with 68% believing politicians are more likely to lie. In the USA, only 22% of its citizens trust the federal government to do what is right, whilst 74% believe in the existence of a deep state, defined as a group of unelected government and military officials who secretly manipulate or direct national policy. This emphasizes the growing distrust shown in both of these countries, although this is not limited to them, as this is something we continue to see around the world. With this in mind, it is no wonder that when people speak of strange officials arriving at their door with the intention to intimidate and control narratives that may otherwise be exposed, people sit up and listen. My name is Luke Mordew, and this urban legend is Men in Black. There are few figures in urban legends as unsettling as the Men in Black. They are said to appear without warning, their dark suits worn as uniforms, with their emotionless expressions giving very little away. Witnesses describe them as both human and otherworldly, with an uncanny ability to appear at the exact moment that a secret was about to be revealed, suggesting that they see far more than they should be able to. Their purpose is to silence those who may have seen too much, erasing truths that they do not want out in the public eye. The stories are chilling, not due to their menace, but for the quiet dread they evoke. They do not threaten with violence, at least not so bluntly, but behind every word is said to be an unspoken threat. They are everywhere, watching everything, even finding themselves connected to other urban legends such as Shadow People, Mothman, the Greys, the Smiling Man, and more. What they're protecting, and for whom they are doing so, remains unknown. But those that are said to have encountered them very rarely emerge unchanged, left instead with more questions, fewer answers, and the unnerving certainty that they are always being watched. In my telling of an encounter with Men in Black, we will follow Derek, a retired photography enthusiast, looking for the perfect photo. Derek loved the sky, everything about it. The whimsical beauty of the white, fluffy clouds that float across the blueness of a summer's day. The dark wonder of the night amongst the glistening stars that peek through the blackness. Since his retirement, he'd been trying to capture that beauty through the eye of a lens, keen to take on his passion for photography, something he had never allowed himself to do in life. These were the years to rest, to finally make the time for the simple things in life that bring you joy. And this is exactly what he wanted to do. It was now Wednesday evening, and Derek was out on the lake, his camera gripped in his hand, wrapped safely around his neck with a strap. Today, he had hoped to capture something special, blending his adoration of the sky with his newly embraced passion for photography. In the local internet forums, a woman in the area had claimed to have seen something fall from the sky, landing in what looked to be the lake. Most assumed it was a drone or a burnt-out firework, although some dreamed bigger, suggesting that it could have been a comet or a satellite. Derek didn't know if anyone had taken it seriously at all, as the comments below her statement were filled with disparaging reactions and sarcastic responses. He didn't know whether to believe it himself. It's not like anyone made a fuss over it. And when he arrived earlier that day, there was no sign of anyone arriving bar the occasional dog walker. He wouldn't have ventured out himself if he didn't already have plans to shoot by the lake. But since he was here, there was something that was on his mind. That was when he wasn't trying to get to grips with his new lens. He spent hours now floating in the middle of the lake on his rowing boat. He hadn't caught many notable photographs, maybe one image of a swan landing on the water, but he wasn't convinced it would look right when he got home and put it on the computer screen. The air was now turning golden as the sun quickly began to sink behind the treetops, causing the long shadows of its branches to reach out over the water. Derek rubbed his rosy, sun-kissed face and took a deep breath, considering how much longer he should sit out on the peaceful waters. But as he opened his eyes once again, something strange caught his attention. A slight glow emitting from the water. He had seen it before that day, but had assumed it was simply the sun reflecting off the ripples upon the lake's surface. Although, even as the air was darkening, the light remained. Curious, Derek leaned forward, peering down into the waters below to ensure he was truly seeing what he thought he was. It seemed to be coming from the very bottom, a pale light, more of a glow, turquoise in colour. It was as if a car had sunk to the very bottom, with its headlights pointing up at the sky for attention. As if by instinct, Derek raised the camera to his face and clicked several photographs before checking the screen to ensure that he wasn't seeing things. But there it was, still in front of him and now repeated on the little screen in his hands. He reached his hand out, holding his camera tightly in the other to ensure it didn't accidentally dip into the water. He brushed his fingertips over the surface of the lake, as if wiping away condensation from glass, half expecting it to give him some clarity. But instead, it seemed to disturb whatever it was, causing the light to quickly disappear, dropping the waters into darkness. Derek pulled away, sitting in the center of his boat, unsure on what to do with himself. Something about the way the light had interacted with his hand had unnerved him, suggesting a level of sentience he hadn't expected. He didn't wait around any longer, gripping his hands on the oars either side of him and quickly rowing himself back to shore. As he got back to his car and loaded the boat onto his back, he paused and looked out onto the quiet waters once again, now disappearing amongst the twilight of the day. The glow hadn't returned, at least not from where he was standing. He jumped into the driver's seat and flicked on the engine, causing the car radio to stutter out of his speakers, jolting and jumping as if struggling to capture a signal through the loud static that accompanied it. Derek flicked it off, dropping him into silence once again as he clicked on the car headlights, glowing amongst the mist that had begun to creep over the dark waters ahead. The wind gently blew through the treetops, causing a natural static to hush its way into the car from outside. The atmosphere had changed so quickly. His perception of the lake was no longer peaceful. It now felt unnerving, almost threatening. No longer did the water feel calm. It now felt as though it was simply lying in wait. Derek turned to the dark trees in the distance, peering as far as he could into the shadow. He wasn't sure why, as he could make out very little amongst the thick branches, but he couldn't shake this feeling that he was being watched. And so he pulled out of the bay and left as quickly as he could. The following hour, Derek was feeling safe again, now in the comforts of home. He had washed his face, changed into more comfortable clothing, and made himself a cup of tea whilst he waited for his photographs to load onto his computer. He slumped down in his desk chair, taking a sip of his hot drink as he clicked on the photo album he had just created, scrolling straight to the bottom to find the images of the lights once more. He opened them all, scattering them across the monitor so he could study them at the same time. And there it was, captured in several frames. The turquoise glow emitting from the murky waters of the lake. What could it have been, he wondered to himself, expecting there to be a perfectly reasonable response, partly hoping for there not to be. Although Derek would not have long to ponder on this, as 3 loud knocks echoed down the wall from behind. He spun in his chair, unnerved by the slow, powerful way in which they came. He spun back to his computer, instinctually flicking off the monitor screen to hide what he had captured before jumping to his feet. As he made his way down the hall, he found his footsteps slowing with each one, noticing the strange silhouettes of 3 black figures against the glass, completely stationary, as if mannequins. Slowly, he reached out and pulled open the door, wider than he intended. In the darkness of the garden stood 3 men, each wearing ill-fitted but well-made black suits. On their heads, they each wore a hat, almost as if a trilby was part of their uniform. One stood ahead, closer to Derek, whilst the others stood slightly behind over each shoulder, forming a triangle shape between them. "Hello, Derek," the first man said in a monotone manner, forcing a smile that lacked any sincerity. "May I come in?" he added, sounding somewhat more personable than before. Derek paused for a moment, studying the 2 men who stood silently behind the other, simply staring back at him as he squirmed in the doorway. "There's no trouble. I'm here to talk about what you saw at the lake." "How do you know what I saw at the lake?" Derek asked cautiously, causing the man to smile again as he replied, "All will be explained." As he said this, he stepped forward, walking into the hallway and straight through to the living room. Derek didn't know why, but he just let him through, too unnerved to stand firm. Instead, he turned back to the other 2, wondering if they were about to follow. But instead, they remained still, standing in the dark, just watching him. In a moment of sudden realization, Derek slammed the door in their faces, glancing one final time at the men through the glass before heading back into the hallway. The men, however, did not react at all, still simply watching him from the darkness. Derek arrived at the living room to find the man standing in the middle of the room, his arms by his side as he calmly waited for Derek to arrive. Without the glow of the computer screen, the room seemed strangely dark, lit only by the lamp next to the sofa. Derek could now at least see his face, although this did nothing but unnerve him further. The man was tall and skinny, his skin so pale it was almost grey, as if you could just about make out the lining of his skull through it. His eyes were sunken and dark, yet piercing and pale. Not quite blue, but not quite white. His lips were thin, and his ears small, although what stood out the most was that there was no hair on his face, not even eyebrows or eyelashes, as if he was newly generated and still not yet complete. The man smiled again, although, just as before, it rang calculated and cold rather than the charming and disarming he was trying to emulate. "Don't go back to the lake," the man said through his smile, his pale eyes fixated on Derek's. "What are you talking about?" Derek asked, remaining defiant. The man turned back to his computer screen, studying the clear monitor for a moment, before turning back to him. "Do not go back to the lake," he repeated, this time firmer, stepping forward as he did so. This, in turn, caused Derek to instinctually step back, hitting himself against the doorframe. "There is nothing for you there," the man added. "None of this is for you. Treat it as a dream and let it be forgotten." Derek remained frozen, his hand gripping the doorframe behind him as he contemplated what action to take as the man stepped forward once again. Instead, he just froze on the spot as the man arrived beside him, pausing for a moment to say, "This is not a request," before simply walking to the front door, stepping out, and gently closing it behind him. As if he had been instantly released from a spell, Derek could move once again, finding himself darting across the room to the computer. He didn't take a seat, leaning over his desk so frantically that he knocked his tea across it. Ignoring this, he flicked on the monitor, unsure on what he was planning on doing with what he had. However, this decision was quickly found to be irrelevant as he discovered that the photographs were no longer there. He frantically moved to the folder and clicked it open, but inside was nothing. Not even the images he had taken of the landing swan. It had been wiped clean. He checked his recently deleted files, but they were not in there either, as if they had never been imported to begin with. He turned to his camera to check the images that were on it, but froze when he realized it was no longer where he had left it. Puzzled, he scanned the table before diving to his knees to check under the desk. It was gone. Not only the images on it, but the camera itself. Furious, Derek paced across the room and darted up the hallway. He flung open the front door and leapt into the darkness of the garden, ready to fight for what was his. But by now, it was already too late. They were no longer anywhere to be seen. He screamed for them to return, but nobody ever responded. He ran out into the road in the hopes that he would catch them drive away, but once again, even on that long stretch of road, there was no sign of anybody around. They were gone, never to be seen again, just like the evidence he had collected that day. The Men in Black urban legend represents several enduring aspects of modern folklore, intertwining UFO mythology, conspiracy theory, and the ever-occurring societal anxieties about authority and their unknown control. Over the years, their presence has evolved to become a representation of the ever-growing tensions between government secrets and the public's understanding of them. Many ufologists interpret the Men in Black as covert operatives, out there to silence any leaks about classified aerospace projects. This is a theory that gained a lot of traction during the Cold War, when the US government's secrecy around initiatives like the U-2 spy plane bred great suspicion. In fact, it has been argued that the supposed methods of these mysterious Men in Black do seem to comfortably align with intelligence agencies' historical use of psychological warfare to discredit witnesses. However, it is worth noting that over the years, not a single declassified document has corroborated such a program. That said, if you're a believer in the true secrecy of Men in Black, this would be no surprise to you. The earliest documented encounter with what we now call the Men in Black occurred not in the shadow of Roswell, but notably just a few days before it, on June 21st, 1947, in Puget Sound, Washington. This event has since gone down in history as the Maury Island incident. And while its details have been debated, the legacy it left behind is hard to ignore. A harbour patrolman by the name of Harold Dahl claimed that whilst out on a boat with his son and dog, he witnessed 6 strange donut-shaped objects hovering in the sky above them. According to Dahl, one of the crafts began releasing metallic debris, allowing slag-like material to rain down from the skies. He claimed that the fragments not only injured his son, but had killed his dog as they landed. To prove the events, Dahl claimed to have taken photographs of it, but when they were developed, they had, suspiciously, come out completely fogged and unusable. It was only the next day that Dahl was said to be visited by a strange man in a black suit. According to the story, the man calmly and precisely described everything that had happened the day before, even details that hadn't yet been made public. From here, the man warned Dahl to remain silent about what he had seen. Dahl's supervisor, Fred Chrisman, later submitted fragments of the supposed debris to Amazing Stories magazine, and from here the incident caught the attention of Army Air Force intelligence. Shortly after, it is said that 2 investigators, Captain William Davidson and First Lieutenant Frank Brown, flew in to look into it all. After collecting what they described as fragments of the strange material, the 2 officers boarded a B-25 to return to base. But unfortunately, the plane never made it back. It was later confirmed that the plane had crashed over southwestern Washington, where both men were killed. The official report cited engine failure, and it was stated that the recovered debris was lost in the crash. The deaths of Davidson and Brown fueled speculation further, with theorists suggesting that the plane had been sabotaged to prevent the officers from transporting the debris. In the months that followed, both Dahl and Chrisman had begun to distance themselves from the incident, with Dahl confessing that it was all just a hoax. Chrisman would instead say that parts of the story were true, but that much of it was fabricated. In the end, the FBI investigation into it all concluded that it was just a hoax, and that the debris identified was just slag from a local smelter. To confuse matters even further, Dahl would later come out once again and retract his confession of a hoax. Believers saw this as 2 threatened men now pretending it was just a lie to keep themselves safe, whilst to non-believers, it was 2 pranksters simply playing with public perception. 6 years later, in 1953, the Men in Black legend began to take a more defined shape with Albert K. Bender. Bender was the founder of the International Flying Saucer Bureau. This organization quickly gained traction, attracting members worldwide, and soon enough, they would begin a successful quarterly publication called Space Review. This served as a platform for sharing UFO sightings and theories about their origins. However, one day, Bender abruptly ended all International Flying Saucer Bureau activities. He would later go on to explain that he had uncovered key information about UFO propulsion systems and had just published his findings in the organization's journal. Shortly after this, though, he claimed that 3 dark-suited men appeared at his home with knowledge that they shouldn't have access to. They had come not to politely ask him to pause what he was doing. They had come to firmly tell him to stop. He disbanded the organization almost immediately. When he finally spoke about the incident, he described the men as threatening, strange, and otherworldly. His account was later detailed further in Gray Barker's 1956 book, They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers, a text widely credited with solidifying the archetype of Men in Black. A trio with an unnatural calmness, an eerie intelligence, and an unspoken promise that silence was safer than truth. That being said, even here, we find facts that undermine the legitimacy of its tale. Whilst Gray Barker framed his book as an expose of sorts, those who knew him later revealed that Barker saw himself less as an investigator and more as an entertainer. He later admitted to embellishing, even fabricating elements of the stories he published, not out of malice, but for theatrical effect. To Barker, the UFO world was part of folklore, part of performance. In October 1967, a familiar name crops up, one who connects us to Shadow People, the Smiling Man, and of course, Mothman. John Keel was a journalist who came to national attention in the 1960s and 70s with a series of deeply unsettling reports that blurred the line between UFO encounters, psychic phenomena, and ancient folklore. It was during his investigation into the Point Pleasant Mothman sightings that Keel claimed to have begun receiving reports of strange men in black suits visiting witnesses. But these men weren't just government agents. According to Keel's sources, they were the pale, robotic, emotionless men in black we've come to know. They asked bizarre questions, whilst some spoke in broken or outdated English. It was even pointed out that they seemed unfamiliar with basic human behaviour, like how to use utensils or operate a phone. Keel himself claimed he was being watched, followed, and that his phone lines had been tapped. He claimed to have received calls from a mechanical-sounding voice that would predict disasters or deliver cryptic messages that made little sense. Around the same time, in 1967, Dr. Herbert Hopkins, a physician from Old Orchard Beach, Maine, was quietly investigating a strange UFO case on the side. It involved two men who claimed they had been teleported aboard an unidentified craft. Hopkins wasn't a full-time researcher, just someone intrigued enough to dig deeper. But in the course of one meeting, he would realize that he had perhaps dug too far. While alone in his home, Hopkins' house phone unexpectedly rang. The voice on the other end when he answered was calm and mechanical, asking if he was alone and whether a representative from a UFO organization could visit. Hopkins, of course, agreed. But then things got stranger. Though the call had ended only moments before, there was already a knock at the door. Standing outside was a man dressed in a black suit and a hat. He was pale to the point of looking artificial, whilst his skin was smooth like plastic. He had no hair on his face, not even eyebrows, and his lips looked as though they'd been painted on. When he spoke, he did so in a monotone fashion, without emotion. Each word seemed calculated, with his voice lacking any trace of natural rhythm or tone. This was strange enough, but it was what the visitor was saying that really threw Hopkins. This visitor knew things he shouldn't have, sharing the details of Hopkins' research and the case at hand. In fact, the stranger even told Hopkins what was in his pocket at the time, as if holding psychic abilities. At one point, it is said the man instructed Hopkins to take a coin from his pocket. Hopkins held it in his hand, and before his very eyes, the coin began to fade. It blurred and it shimmered before eventually vanishing. The stranger calmly explained that the coin would never be seen again, just like what would happen to a certain researcher if he continued to dig. Shaken to his core, Hopkins complied and burned all traces of the case. He would later describe the encounter as one of the most disturbing events of his life, not just for what happened, but for what that visitor might have been. In 1970, John Keel released his book, Operation Trojan Horse. In this, he first introduced the idea of ultra-terrestrials, entities not from another planet, but from another reality entirely, a parallel realm. According to Keel, these beings have always been with us, changing shape throughout history as fairies, demons, spirits, and now aliens, fitting with whatever form best suits the time. He believed the phenomenon was adaptive, manipulative, and far more psychological than physical. It was a radical idea, one that challenged the growing belief in spacecrafts and space travel at the same time. It was Keel and others like him that took these twisted but ultimately real-world stories and turned them into something otherworldly. His work is consistently divisive, and as I've discussed in previous chapters, much of his work is easily disproven. But it is undeniable just how much this man managed to affect so many connecting urban legends. Once again, he had taken something already strange and transformed it into something far more interesting and sellable. Now, the men in black were not just silencers. They were symbols, warnings, masks worn by something we do not yet understand, watching us from beyond the veil. In 1987, the otherwise quiet town of Wytheville, Virginia, found itself becoming the center of an unusual wave of UFO sightings. Dozens of residents, including police officers, had reported seeing strange lights and silent crafts moving through the sky. During this time, Danny Gordon, a local radio news director, claimed to have taken several photographs of the objects, one of which he said showed a tight V formation. According to him, when the film was developed, some of the images were missing or had come out blank, something he believed wasn't accidental. He later stated that he received several anonymous calls warning him to stop digging. One, he claimed, even went as far as to tell him he was getting too close to the truth. He also said that two men, identifying themselves as journalists, visited his station unannounced. The questions they asked him felt probing and controlled, with the whole encounter leaving him shaken. Soon after, Gordon claimed that his house had been broken into, but strangely, nothing had been taken. That was, except for a specific set of UFO photographs he hadn't yet released. Eventually, during a public talk on the sightings, Gordon collapsed due to stress, which he would attribute to the pressure and fear surrounding the case. The story had gained national attention, and his experience soon became a fixture in UFO lore. But over time, he stepped away from the world of ufology. He said that for him, the fear was real, even if he wasn't sure what he had uncovered. In later interviews, he wouldn't backtrack on his story, but he would speak of it cautiously, saying it had become more personal than he had ever expected. In 1990, Aircell Comics, which was later absorbed into Malibu Comics, first published their new comic book, The Men in Black. Written by Lowe Cunningham and illustrated by Sandy Carruthers, the series took the core elements of the lore, mysterious agents suppressing alien encounters, and gave them a darker, grittier edge. The comic portrayed the Men in Black as part of a secret organization monitoring all things paranormal: aliens, monsters, time travelers, and even demons. But unlike the later film versions, these agents weren't clear heroes, being far more morally ambiguous and ruthless in their approach. Their job wasn't to protect Earth so much as it was to control the information, eliminate threats, and erase memories, even going as far as committing murder if need be. This all changed in the mid-1990s when Sony Pictures bought the film rights soon after Malibu was acquired by Marvel Comics. The premise was reimagined, with the tone shifting from dystopian to a popcorn-friendly family romp. The agents got names, personalities, and a slick sci-fi gadget upgrade. And in the summer of 1997, the Men in Black traveled through the screen and straight into mainstream pop culture. The film wasn't just a success, it was a phenomenon, launching an animated series, a string of sequels, and a mountain of merchandise. Almost overnight, Men in Black had shifted from folklore to franchise. With this shift in public perception, much of the fear around these tales had softened alongside it, with the unease being replaced by punchlines and CGI. In fact, some have even argued that the movie was merely a ploy to further deepen their mystery, hiding in plain sight. With the association now being a silly, fun Hollywood movie, anyone who claims to have experienced an encounter with the real Men in Black would be seen with less validity than they previously could have had. That being said, whilst the public perception had changed overall, the older stories didn't disappear, and the mystery still continued. In 2008, Shane Suvar, a hotel manager at Niagara Falls and a security guard, reported seeing a bright, unidentified light in the sky. Something they couldn't explain. Weeks later, according to Suvar, two men dressed in black suits, fedoras, and trench coats entered the hotel lobby, asking for him by name. Suvar was off duty at the time, but staff members described the men as exceptionally tall, pale, and identical in appearance, with hypnotic eyes and a total lack of facial hair. Some staff reportedly said the men never blinked and gave off an oppressive feeling, almost as if they could sense thoughts. Although, what makes this encounter stand out amongst the others is that on this occasion, the building that the Men in Black had entered was filled with CCTV. Suvar claims to have reviewed the hotel security tape, finding images showing two tall men in black entering the lobby, matching the staff's descriptions. However, this footage didn't surface publicly until 2012, when the case was investigated by the Aerial Phenomena Investigations team known as API. This delay in the release has led some to question the authenticity and context of the footage though, especially when considering that in that same year, the third Men in Black film was being released. However, it is worth noting that there is no verifiable evidence that links the release of this footage to the film's campaign. The images are now available to be viewed online, with many divided in their opinions. Some believed it showed something genuinely unusual, two uncanny figures that fit the classic Men in Black archetypes. Others were skeptical, pointing out the footage's graininess, the lack of continuous video, and the way the story came out after years of UFO and paranormal internet lore. Critics suggest it could have been a hoax, the aforementioned marketing stunt, or simply a misunderstanding. But to this day, there's no definitive proof of what really happened. The only verifiable facts are that they did indeed report a UFO sighting in 2008, and the existence of the security footage released in 2012. But everything else about the men's behaviour, appearance, and supposed abilities is based solely on witness accounts. The footage itself remains ambiguous, fueling both belief and doubt depending on whether you are already a believer or not. A consistent theme throughout these narratives. If you're still listening, I know you share my passion for folklore and urban legends. But to keep these stories coming, I need your help. For just £3 a month, you can ensure the show thrives, with shorter breaks between seasons and even more content created. As a Patreon subscriber, you'll unlock exclusive perks, including access to our bonus series, Modern Myths, giving you 8 additional episodes each season, featuring captivating tales such as The Hodag, The Dark Watchers, and many more. You'll also enjoy behind-the-scenes insights, discounts on merchandise, and access to our private community chat, where you can connect directly with me and other urban legend enthusiasts. And as an extra thank you, I randomly feature patrons in upcoming stories, so you could become part of the legends we discuss. Your support isn't just subscribing, it's joining a passionate community dedicated to keeping folklore alive. Your contribution directly fuels the research and production of this show. If you're ready to join, just click the Patreon link in our show notes to subscribe, and I'll see you there. But for now, back to the legend. The Men in Black urban legend is such a curious one, as it so comfortably sits on several floors of speculation and wild belief. If you are someone who ventures deep to the bottom of conspiracy, where aliens live amongst us and control more than we know, then the idea of Men in Black as strange, otherworldly entities entrusted to keep us on track is perfectly believable. If instead, you're not into conspiracy at all and focus more on a more plausible understanding of conspiracy, then the Men in Black as covert agents working deep in government to control narratives is also perfectly believable. Oftentimes, varying differences between beliefs diminish the authenticity of the urban legend itself. However, on this occasion, it works in its favor. With them being so shrouded in mystery, the confusion around them only adds to the public curiosity. It is a fact that governments try to control narratives in many ways, a significant and clear factor in politics. With that in mind, the Men in Black do truly exist in a metaphorical sense, a visual representation of a very real level of control we should all be aware of. Although some stories out there seemingly blur the lines between the more grounded and fantastical elements. If we turn away from these mysterious men with otherworldly abilities and instead focus on the real-life stories their tales could represent, we will find stories that form a bridge between fact and folklore. Stories that are likely still filled with misinformation and exaggeration, but are still far more grounded in our reality. The first of our tales takes us back to the late 1970s, where Paul Benowitz, a respected electronic specialist and small business owner, lived in Albuquerque, New Mexico. His home at the time sat overlooking Kirtland Air Force Base, a heavily secured military facility. He must have seen some fascinating sights over the years. However, it was one sighting in particular he would become known for years to come. He would begin to speak of what he believed to be strange aerial phenomena above the base in the form of unusual lights. He added that around this time, he was also picking up strange radio signals that he couldn't explain. In his view, these were not just anomalies, they were communications from extraterrestrial sources. In his research, He documented everything he could, including photographs, film, and written reports. And in 1979, Benowitz finally brought his findings directly to the US Air Force, specifically to personnel at Kirtland AFB. To his delight, rather than dismissing him, they took the time to listen. Although it is said that behind this friendly, welcoming demeanour, a far more sinister plot was underway. According to later investigations, particularly Greg Bishop's 2005 book, Project Beta, the team at Kirtland AFB made a calculated decision. Rather than tell him he was wrong and send him on his way, they would lean into his beliefs as a form of counterintelligence. At the time, Kirtland Air Force Base was home to classified weapons testing and satellite programs, which suggests that Benowitz may have unknowingly observed or recorded highly sensitive activity. Officials from the Air Force Office of Special Investigations are said to have engaged with him directly, allegedly feeding him false information to keep his attention away from those programs, keeping him busy with misunderstandings and unfounded mysteries, thereby protecting sensitive defense projects. It was reportedly Agent Richard Doty who had been assigned the role to reinforce Benowitz's belief in alien activity, with further corroboration coming from Bill Moore, a UFO researcher who, in 1989, admitted to participating in the disinformation efforts against Benowitz. He stated that he was involved in a scheme to provide Benowitz with this false information to monitor how the information spread within the UFO community. Over time, Benowitz's beliefs escalated as he now became convinced there was a secret underground alien base in Dulce, New Mexico. He wrote to senators, defense agencies, and UFO researchers across the board. His home had slowly evolved into a fortress of surveillance equipment, whilst his writings focused on alien abduction, implants, and mind control. Unfortunately, by the mid-1980s, this all had taken a large toll on his mental health, and his well-being was quickly deteriorating. In 1988, Benowitz was admitted to hospital for psychiatric care at the request of his family. He never fully recovered and remained somewhat isolated for the rest of his life until he died in 2003 at the age of 75 years old. To this day, there is no evidence that the lights Benowitz saw were extraterrestrial in nature. And although there are elements of the story with shaky foundations, there does seem to be credible reporting that he was deliberately misled by government officials trying to protect real-world national security programs, a defense mechanism that inadvertently destroyed a life. Phil Schneider is another name that often crops up within conspiracy circles even today. He claimed to be a former government contractor, a geologist who worked on secret underground facilities across the US. One of these, near Dulce, New Mexico, was an alleged base that housed a joint human-alien program. According to Schneider, it was during a construction job in 1979 that his team accidentally drilled into a hidden chamber and triggered a firefight with non-human entities. He said he was injured in the encounter, pointing to missing fingers and chest scars as proof. Although, as you may expect, none of these claims have ever been independently verified. It was in the 1990s that Schneider went public, giving lectures across the US, claiming that a secret faction of the US government was working alongside extraterrestrials, ensuring their secrecy by suppressing advanced technology and eliminating whistleblowers. He claimed he was being followed and that his life was in danger. He even went as far as to say that if he was ever to be found dead, it wouldn't be by suicide. I quote, "That would become noteworthy when, in January 1996, Phil Schneider was found dead in his apartment, with the official cause being suicide by surgical tubing. These stories, Paul Benowitz, slowly undone by calculated disinformation, and Paul Schneider, whose claims ended in paranoia and death, show two sides of a dark reality. Whether grounded in real government tactics or built on layers of exaggeration, both accounts tap into something that feels deeply plausible in our world: that truth can be hidden in plain sight and that there are consequences for those that cross the line. The threat of power and control by deep-seated organizations is something that even the least conspiracy-minded people are aware of. But as we've seen across human history, oftentimes, when a threat is abstract, we find it difficult to take it seriously. Psychologically speaking, putting a face onto it makes it far more tangible for us to comprehend. Although, what that face looks like is another aspect altogether. Descriptions of the Men in Black do bear consistencies, and there is an overall consensus on certain aspects of them. However, variations do remain. They are commonly described as being very pale, with completely hairless skin. On occasions, they've also been said to have unnervingly large eyes. They are always described as wearing black suits. That much is consistent throughout, although the sunglasses and hats they wear vary from story to story. Their speech pattern is described as monotone, with their body language being strange and awkward, as if having to perform as human. Those who have witnessed them arrive in their vehicles have often described their cars as being vintage black ones, with no license plate on them. Their role in our universe is now shrouded in mystery as different theories venture forward from all angles. John Keel's understanding that they are, in fact, not human at all has also branched out into a shared belief that they are entities here to police Earth on behalf of alien civilizations. This would explain how and why they have consistently seemed to possess abilities such as teleportation, telepathy, and resistance to injury. Some have even gone so far as to claim they have witnessed Men in Black bleed, with their blood being a strange green liquid rather than the expected deep red of Earth's creatures. This supernatural stranger motif has been known to show its head across cultures worldwide during periods of societal stress, serving as a projection of collective anxieties. In post-World War II, rapid technology changed and newfound atomic fears made the general public extra responsive to worries of technologically superior others. This correlates in its timeline with the ever-growing factors that resulted in the explosions of UFO phenomena. On top of this, polls worldwide have shown a consistent decline in faith in governments since the 1960s. And it's in this climate of institutional distrust that tales like that of the Men in Black thrive. This isn't helped by infamous events such as the Watergate scandal or the Snowden leaks. Not to mention the growing understanding that no matter who is in charge, any want to look out for people is secondary to a desire for control and power. With this in mind, it is easy to see how the personification of this distrust and secrecy has come to represent abstract fears in tangible villains. On top of this is a more obvious understanding of their importance in society. If they are real, then this heavily suggests that there truly is more going on in our universe than we currently know, and this creates an eerie feeling for many, teetering on fear and discomfort. However, alongside this is also an undeniable excitement of what this could mean for us. To know that we are not alone. While the Men in Black remain somewhat modern in their imagery and intentions, their themes do seem to echo older myths from past folkloric tales. Scholar Peter Reesewich has drawn parallels between the Men in Black story and folkloric entities of the past, such as the devil itself, who was often said to appear as a well-dressed stranger, there to bargain for souls or to enforce silence. This connects us to the ultra-terrestrials theory from John Keel, where he himself suggested that what we once understood as devils, we now understood as life forms from another world. Men in Black are now very much part of our culture. They have gone from a niche belief to a widespread conspiracy theory to household names. You'll be hard-pressed to find somebody who doesn't have at least a slight idea of what someone is referring to when mentioning the Men in Black. They were even mentioned in Steven Spielberg's 1982 film E.T., where one of the children warns that the men in suits are going to take him away. It's not said outright, but the implication is clear. In Close Encounters of the Third Kind, another Spielberg film, mysterious government agents descend on locations linked to UFO sightings, covering up evidence and manipulating witnesses. These, once again, aren't outright called Men in Black, but they operate just the same. By the late 20th century, the idea had fully matured, and in 1997, the film Men in Black turned them into pop icons, agents not of menace, but of interstellar immigration enforcement. In this narrative, they were not unnerving beings here to threaten and intimidate. Now, they were here to save us with fast action and quick wit. This significantly changed the general public's understanding of Men in Black, but the original idea never really left. Shows like The X-Files leaned back into the fear, portraying shadowy men behind every secret. Fringe, Doctor Who, and even The Simpsons have used the image. Pale men in dark suits, always just a little too tall, just a little too quiet, and always arriving after something impossible has occurred. A large factor that keeps the legend of Men in Black alive is the sheer mystery of it. Their ambiguity creates a mysticism and fascination amongst those who hear about them. Are they secret agents to an extremely secretive base of government, most notably within the US? Or are they extraterrestrial beings secretly controlling much of our world, perhaps even above the jurisdiction and understanding of our appointed leaders? The Men in Black have become shorthand for the silencing of uncomfortable truths, oppressors of freedom and discovery. From their dubious origins to their reinvention by Hollywood, the phenomenon reveals more about humanity than many other modern myths still shared today. It encapsulates the fraught relationship many have with both unfettered authority and the secrets that may be kept from us. Whether they be interpreted as government agents, alien enforcers, or mere psychological projections, the Men in Black embody a collective need to make sense of dense power structures and existential uncertainties. Their consistency throughout popular culture illuminates a curiosity that grows with every year. In an age of misinformation and digital surveillance, who really has the answers to humanity's secrets?
Urban Legends is researched, written and produced by Luke Morgie. Co-edited by Sophie Teakle. Music by Billy Jupp. With additional sounds from Storyblocks and Envato. If you liked what you heard and want to hear more, please like and review our show on your chosen podcast provider. This simple task is a big part of our show's continuation and growth. To access more chapters through our bonus material, early releases, ad-free content and more, become a patron by clicking the link in our show notes. To follow us on TikTok, Instagram or YouTube, simply search Urban Legends Folklore or visit lukemorgie.com/podcast. If you have more information or a correction on anything said, email us on luke@lukemorgie.com. We aim to ensure that all information provided is accurate and up to date, and this remains a top priority.